Have you ever felt that life gave you no choice, only for fate to step in with a completely unexpected turn? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know. Agatha Christie's The Man from the Sea isn't just a mystery. It's a moving story about redemption, hidden truths, and second chances. At its heart lies a haunting question: can love and destiny rewrite a life already marked by despair? A man with only months left to live arrives on a lonely island, planning to end his suffering. But what he finds instead is a strange figure in harlequin costume, a hidden woman carrying decades of sorrow, and a revelation that changes everything. If you enjoy timeless mysteries where fate and emotion collide, you'll want to stay with me through this tale. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button now. By subscribing, you'll never miss more of Agatha Christie's forgotten gems and classic twists brought to life in fresh detail. Let's start the story. Scene 1. Scene 1. A Man on the Edge. Mr. Satterthwaite was beginning to feel old, and that in itself unsettled him. For years, people had been labeling him as elderly, sometimes with careless bluntness. Young men, all bravado and ignorance, would exclaim, "He must be 100 or at least 80, while even the kindest of women, cloaking their judgment in sympathy, whispered, "He's quite old, surely 60. That last assumption stung most of all, for Satterthwaite was not 60. He was 69, and in his own estimation, 69 was far from an ending. It was a curious, promising age, one where life's collected wisdom might finally ripen into something of value. Yet what he felt now was not wisdom, but weariness, a creeping heaviness of spirit that left him questioning his purpose. What was he, after all? An aging man with no wife, no children, no one to claim him. His wealth had brought him an art collection admired by many, but in this moment even his paintings seemed lifeless, offering no real comfort. There was no one to notice whether he lived another year or died tomorrow. Shaken by the bleakness of his own thoughts, he tried to steady himself. He knew better than to indulge such self-pity. Marriage might not have suited him anyway. Who could say whether a wife would have been a blessing or a burden? Children, more often than not, were a source of anxiety rather than joy. No, he reminded himself, safety and comfort were life's true luxuries. His mind drifted to a letter he had received that very morning. He pulled it from his pocket, savoring it once more. It was from a duchess, one of the many figures of nobility who brightened his social circle. The letter was, of course, a charmingly veiled request for money, but Satterthwaite forgave that easily, for the words were written with wit and grace. She teased him about deserting the Riviera, mocked his tendency to coddle himself, and even warned that his only salvation lay in his endless curiosity about other people's affairs. Folding the letter, he smiled faintly, picturing her sharp tongue, her humor, and her unbreakable spirit. Spirit, yes, that was what people needed. Perhaps that was what he was losing. He reached for another letter, this one postmarked from Germany, penned by a young soprano he had once helped. It was filled with gratitude. She was about to debut in Isolde. He hummed a few bars to himself, though with a shake of his head he admitted she lacked the fire for such a role. Still, he had given her a chance, and that counted for something. Yet even the thought of his small good deeds did little to ease the sense of gloom that clung to him. Why had he left the Riviera, a place where he was admired, where people recognized him as the Mr. Satterthwaite, the companion of duchesses, the friend of artists and musicians? Here on this island, he was a stranger. The same families had vacationed here for generations, proud of nothing more than their long unbroken attendance. They did not care for art, music, or society. To them, he was nobody. With a sigh, he walked down from his hotel toward the little harbor. The path was lined with bougainvillea, scarlet blossoms tumbling down in a wild, jubilant cascade. Their vibrant vitality mocked his own grey despondency. "I am getting old," he whispered. "Old and tired." He felt almost relieved when the flowers were behind him and the road opened onto a street that led straight toward the glittering sea. A dog lounged in the middle of the road, stretching luxuriously in the sunshine before giving itself an indulgent scratch. Then, catching a whiff of something enticing, it bounded toward a rubbish heap, rolling in its pungent discoveries with unashamed delight. For a moment, Satterthwaite almost envied the animal's carefree abandon. But joy is fleeting, even for dogs. A rattling, ramshackle car shot around the corner, striking the animal mercilessly before speeding away without a pause. The dog staggered, turning his gaze to Satterthwaite with eyes clouded by reproach and confusion, then crumpled lifeless to the ground. The sight pierced him deeply. For a brief, aching instant, it seemed as though the dog's eyes had asked, "World, why have you betrayed me?" Satterthwaite walked on, heavy-hearted. Life was cruel, mercilessly so. He passed palm trees and clusters of white houses, the black lava beach where the surf crashed thunderously, and the rock pools where children splashed with elderly matrons who dared to call it bathing. Memories of past tragedies haunted the shore, the swimmer who had drowned there years ago, the relentless sea swallowing life without hesitation. Finally, the steep road wound upward to the cliff's edge, where a solitary house stood, stark and watchful, its name befitting its place, La Paz. Trivia question: Mr. Satterthwaite receives a letter from a duchess at the beginning of this chapter. What does she teasingly accuse him of becoming? Too adventurous, too serious, or too comfortable? Scene 2. The enigmatic Mr. Quinn. On the cliffs overlooking the vast, glittering sea stood a solitary white villa, its paint fading and shutters firmly closed. Time seemed to have pressed pause on this house. Wild but beautiful gardens surrounded it, with tangled flowers climbing across stone paths and cypress trees forming a solemn row that led straight to a plateau at the cliff's edge. From there, the ocean stretched endlessly, the horizon blurred where blue water met the sky. This lonely spot had become a quiet refuge for Mr. Satterthwaite, though he had never once set foot inside the villa itself. Its mystery only deepened his attachment. The Spanish gardener Manuel was often the only living presence at the villa. With courtly manners and an ever-bright smile, he would greet ladies by offering them bouquets of blossoms, while men received a single flower for their buttonholes. Mr. Satterthwaite never left without accepting one, and today it was an orange rosebud he tucked carefully into his coat. Sometimes, in idle moments, he invented stories about the villa's owner, perhaps a once famous Spanish dancer who had retreated from the world, guarding her fading beauty behind shuttered windows. He imagined her wandering the gardens at dusk, the air heavy with secrets. Yet he never asked Manuel the truth. The fantasy was far more satisfying. That afternoon, as he strolled down the cypress path and settled at the cliff's edge, the sheer drop beneath him and the immensity of the sea stirred something melancholic within him. The scene reminded him of Tristan and Isolde, that tragic opera where passion and death are intertwined. He sighed, realizing how hollow his own life felt. Wealth and society had given him many acquaintances, but not companionship. At that moment, he felt poorer than a stray dog in the street. His brooding was suddenly broken by the sharp sound of an English exclamation behind him. Surprised, he turned and saw a man watching him. Recognition dawned. This was the newcomer he had noticed at the hotel only yesterday. Though nearing 50, the man had the unfinished air of someone who had never quite grown into himself. Plump, sleek, with fair hair touched by grey, a small moustache, and round brown eyes, he looked well-fed, comfortable, and indulgent, a man more at home on polo fields or golf courses than on a quiet, contemplative island. The stranger apologized lightly, confessing he hadn't expected to find anyone there, and sat down beside Mr. Satterthwaite. Yet there was a faint irritation in his tone, as though annoyed his solitude had been interrupted. It struck Mr. Satterthwaite as odd. Why should a man like this insist so strongly on being alone? Was he waiting for someone? Or hiding something? When pressed, the man admitted he had already been to the villa the night before, slipping in after dark by climbing over the wall. This revelation startled Mr. Satterthwaite. The man had only just arrived on the island, had scarcely had time to notice the villa in daylight, yet had made a deliberate effort to visit it secretly under the cover of night. For the first time, Mr. Satterthwaite's instinct for mystery began to stir. Something more than idle curiosity was unfolding here. Question for viewers. If you discovered someone sneaking into an abandoned villa at night, would you assume they were chasing romance or hiding a darker purpose? Scene 3. The hidden villa and its secret occupant. Almost without meaning to, Mr. Satterthwaite turned his gaze once more toward the villa with its pale green shutters. As always, the house stared back at him in silence, shuttered and lifeless, like a sleeping guardian keeping its secrets locked away. Surely, he thought, the answer to this strange puzzle could not lie within those walls. His attention shifted back to his companion, and with quiet curiosity, he asked if the man had truly met someone here. The stranger nodded. Yes, he had seen a figure the night before, a man in fancy dress. At once, Mr. Satterthwaite's interest quickened. Fancy dress? He echoed, his voice sharper than he intended. The man shrugged casually. Yes, a sort of harlequin costume. I assumed it was part of one of those costume dances the hotels put on. The words struck Mr. Satterthwaite with a peculiar force. His breath caught as he murmured, "Quite. Then, leaning forward, he asked almost eagerly, "Tell me, have you ever heard of catalysis?" The man blinked at him blankly. "Never. What is it?" So, Mr. Satterthwaite explained, "It's a chemical reaction, one that cannot take place unless a particular substance is present. Curiously, that substance itself remains unchanged, yet without it, nothing would happen at all." Still puzzled, the man only nodded faintly. But Satterthwaite pressed on. "I have a friend," he continued, "and I can only describe him in those terms. His name is Mr. Quinn. His presence acts as a catalyst. When he appears, hidden truths are revealed, long-buried secrets surface, and revelations seem inevitable. Yet he never directly intervenes. He simply sets things in motion." The stranger looked uncomfortable as he recalled the previous evening. Yes, it felt sudden, almost unnatural. One moment I was alone, and the next, he was there. It was as though he had risen straight from the sea. He gestured toward the cliff edge, where the drop fell sheer into the depths below. "Of course, that's impossible. No man could climb up there. But that was the impression he gave me." Satterthwaite allowed himself a faint smile. "An ideal place for an accident, or even a murder," he remarked quietly. The man looked startled, as though the meaning escaped him. Then, with an awkward laugh, he mumbled, "Oh yes, of course." He began tapping the ground distractedly with his stick, his brow furrowed in a troubled expression that struck Satterthwaite as strangely familiar. It was the same bewildered, hurt look he had once seen in a dog struck by a motor car, an expression of reproach, of childlike disbelief that the world could suddenly turn so cruel. And now, watching his companion closely, Satterthwaite began to see the resemblance more clearly. The man's life had been easy, full of leisure and pleasure, untroubled by serious thought, much like the carefree existence of that dog. But both had now been struck by something sudden and merciless. At last, the man spoke again, almost to himself. "One wonders what it's all for." It was the sort of question Satterthwaite had heard before, but rarely with such raw confusion. The man gave a little apologetic laugh. "I once heard it said that every man ought to build a house, plant a tree, and father a son. I think I may have planted an acorn once." Satterthwaite's curiosity, never far from the surface, now stirred fully awake. With the patient attentiveness of a confidant, he listened as the stranger introduced himself as Anthony Cosden. The story that unfolded was just as Satterthwaite had imagined. A comfortable existence, full of sports, travel, friends, and fleeting romances. A life without much reflection, lived moment to moment. Not a bad life, perhaps, but not a deeply examined one either. And then came the cruel turn. Anthony admitted haltingly that he had recently visited a doctor, followed by a London specialist. At first, they softened their words, speaking of caution and care, but nothing could disguise the truth. His time was short. 6 months, perhaps less. He lifted his round brown eyes, filled with confusion and disbelief. "It was rather a shock, you see. One doesn't quite know what to do." Mr. Satterthwaite nodded gravely, his heart tightening with a silent understanding. The weight of inevitability had fallen upon this man, and Satterthwaite could already sense where it might drive him. Question for viewers. If you were given just 6 months to live, would you spend that time seeking adventure, making peace with loved ones, or withdrawing from the world like Anthony? Scene 4. A shocking confession. Anthony Cosden was living with a burden unlike anything he had ever known, the certainty of a fast approaching end. The specialists had been clear, his time was numbered, and the knowledge pressed down on him like an iron weight. Each day felt strangely doubled, urgent because every hour mattered, and hollow because nothing seemed to hold meaning anymore. He did not yet feel sick, though he knew that would come. Waiting for the inevitable felt intolerable, like standing in line for a punishment one could not escape. Mr. Satterthwaite, watching him closely, asked with quiet tact if there might be a woman who could bring some comfort in these final months. Anthony gave a short laugh and shook his head. There had been women, of course, plenty of them, but not the kind a man could lean on when facing death. His companions were cheerful, frivolous, and entirely unsuited to sorrow. He had no wish to be pitied, no desire to watch them shrink from his weakness. That was why he had come abroad, drifting among these islands, far from familiar eyes. Satterthwaite's curiosity pressed further. Had Anthony visited this place before? For a moment, Cosden hesitated, then admitted that yes, long ago, when he was younger, he had stood upon these cliffs. Almost absently, his gaze slid toward the shuttered villa. The sight stirred a memory, and his voice dropped low as he murmured, "The cliffs, the sea, endless, eternal." Satterthwaite, his intuition sharp, finished the thought for him. "And that is why you came here last night, ready to end it." Anthony started, caught off guard, and tried to brush it aside with a weak protest. Yet the truth was plain. He had come to the plateau intending to take the final step into the abyss. Only a sudden interruption had stopped him, a stranger in a harlequin costume. And today, again, fate had intervened, this time in the form of Mr. Satterthwaite. "It is my life," Anthony argued, his voice tightening. and I've the right to do with it as I please." Satterthwaite waved away the words as trite. Anthony pressed harder, claiming that a quick, deliberate end was far kinder than waiting for his body to fail, kinder to himself and to others. After all, who was left to care? "I belong to no one," he said quietly. But something in the way he spoke made Satterthwaite's eyes narrow. "And if you did belong to someone?" he asked sharply. Anthony faltered, then muttered that it would make no difference. After a pause, almost against his will, he confessed to a single regret. He had lived fully, sampled pleasures, enjoyed friendships, pursued excitement, yet he had never known the bond of fatherhood. "I suppose," he admitted awkwardly, "I've had everything but a son." Patient until now, Satterthwaite's composure sharpened. "You speak," he told the younger man, "as though you've reached the end of experience. But you've only known the first season. A man who has seen nothing but winter cannot claim to know the year. You've never tasted the spring, the heat of summer, the fading gold of autumn, and you would turn away before you even discover they exist." Anthony countered bitterly, "6 months, that is all I have." "6 months," Satterthwaite replied firmly, "can hold more richness than all the years you have wasted. It depends on what you do with them." The young man gave a short laugh, defensive and tired. "In my place, you'd do the same." But Satterthwaite shook his head with quiet finality. "No. First, I doubt I'd have the courage, and second, I've always wanted to know what tomorrow will bring." The tension eased slightly as Anthony broke into a laugh, half amused, half weary. "You've been good to let me spill all this out," he admitted. "I hardly know why I've told you so much. Best to forget it." Rising, he added with a shrug, "Anyway, I must be off. If you hear tomorrow that there's been an accident, well, you'll know." Satterthwaite met his eyes gravely. "And I am to suggest nothing of suicide?" Anthony shrugged again. "Say what you like. You cannot stop me." But Satterthwaite, calm as ever, replied, "True. I cannot tie myself to you like a barnacle. Sooner or later, you'd give me the slip, but not today. You wouldn't want me accused of pushing you over the edge, would you?" Anthony managed a wry smile. For now, the plan was delayed. He announced his intention to return to the hotel and departed with his easy charm, leaving Satterthwaite alone on the plateau. The older man stood gazing at the vast horizon, murmuring to himself, "There must be a next. What comes next?" His footsteps carried him slowly back along the cypress path. At the villa, curiosity overcame him. He climbed the cracked stone steps, laid a hand against a shutter, and to his surprise, it swung open. A figure appeared at the window, a woman dressed in black, a lace mantilla framing her face. Startled, Satterthwaite stammered an apology in a mix of Italian and German, fumbling even for Spanish. The woman remained silent, her eyes fixed on him, until at last her voice rang out, sharp, commanding, "Come back." There was no resisting the authority in her tone. He obeyed. "You are English," she said, studying him. "I thought as much." Flustered, he apologized again, explaining that curiosity had led him up the steps, that he had long wished to glimpse the inside of the mysterious villa. To his surprise, she laughed, a deep, resonant laugh. "If you truly wish to see, then come in." Heart quickening, Satterthwaite entered. The room was dim, dust heavy in the air, the furniture meager. But she led him into another chamber, one flooded with sunlight. The furniture was simple, yet fresh flowers filled the bowls, their colors glowing against the faded rugs. Life and decay mingled strangely in that space, and Satterthwaite knew, with a sudden thrill, that something important was about to unfold. Trivia question for viewers. If you were in Anthony's place, would you fight to make the most of the 6 months left, or choose to end things on your own terms? Scene 5. The Forgotten Love Story. The woman regarded Mr. Satterthwaite with a steady, unwavering gaze before declaring with quiet command, "You will take tea with me." Her tone left no room for refusal. Then, with a hint of reassurance, she added, "It is proper tea, made with boiling water." She disappeared briefly, calling out something in Spanish, before returning and seating herself gracefully on a sofa opposite him. For the first time, Satterthwaite could truly study her. She radiated vitality, a strength of presence that made him feel smaller, older, more faded than he had a moment before. Though no longer young, she was striking, tall, sun-darkened, handsome. When she entered a room, it seemed brighter, more alive, as if the sunlight itself drew nearer to her. A curious warmth seeped into him, almost as though his frail spirit were stretching out thin hands toward a blazing fire. She had such force of life, he thought, that she could lend it to others. And he found himself wishing, half wistfully, that young Olga, his delicate protégée, might possess just a trace of that power. Yet despite his admiration, he felt uneasy. He had never cared for women who dominated through sheer will. Her scrutiny, bold and direct, unsettled him. She studied him with her chin resting on her hands, eyes sharp and appraising. At last she nodded, as though satisfied with some unspoken judgment. "I am glad you came," she said softly. "I needed someone very badly this afternoon, someone to talk to, and you are accustomed to that, aren't you?" He blinked, uncertain. "I'm not sure I understand." "Yes, you do," she pressed, her tone unwavering. "People confide in you. That is your gift. Why pretend otherwise? One could tell you anything. It is because you are half a woman. You sense what we feel, the strange, tangled things that live in our hearts." Her voice trailed away, as if caught by some inward memory. At that moment, a smiling Spanish servant girl entered, carrying the tea tray. The fragrance of fine China tea filled the room, and Satterthwaite, a connoisseur of such things, found it excellent. Grateful for the interruption, he shifted the conversation to lighter ground. "You live here always?" he asked. "Not always," she replied, "but more often than anyone realizes. I only use these rooms." He nodded. "They say this house is usually locked up." "Usually, yes," she said, "but it has been mine for 22 years. I lived here a year before that." Satterthwaite hesitated, feeling his comment might sound clumsy, then said, "That is a very long time." She tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "The year, or the 22 years? They are two separate lives, two different stories. Which is long, which is short? Even now, I cannot tell." Her voice softened. "It has been so long since I truly talked with anyone. But you came to my shutter, curious to peer inside. That is what you always do, isn't it? Lifting the curtain, looking into people's lives, sometimes when they allow it, and often when they do not. Yet you guess, and you guess right." Something in her frankness made Satterthwaite respond with equal honesty. "I am 69, he admitted. "Everything I know of life, I know at second hand. Sometimes that is bitter. And yet, perhaps because of it, I know a good deal." She regarded him thoughtfully. "Strange. Always an onlooker, never in the center. I cannot imagine what that must be like." He smiled faintly. "No, you cannot. Your place has always been upon the stage. You will always be the prima donna." She raised an eyebrow at that. "What a curious thing to say." "But true," he insisted. "Things happen to you. They will always happen to you. I sense that much. Sometimes tragic things." Her eyes narrowed, darkened. They will tell you, if you remain here, of the English swimmer who drowned below these cliffs. They will say he was young, strong, beautiful, and that his young wife stood helpless above, watching as the sea crushed him against the rocks. Yes, Satterthwaite said gently. I have already heard that story. Her gaze did not waver. That man was my husband. This villa was his. He brought me here when I was 18. A year later he was dead, his body broken by the surf, shattered against the black rocks. Satterthwaite's shock was genuine. A tragedy indeed, he breathed. For a wife to endure such horror, there can be nothing more dreadful. Her head tilted back suddenly and she laughed, a low, rich, startling laugh. You are wrong, she said. There is something worse, far worse. He stared, uncomprehending. She leaned forward, eyes blazing. More terrible than watching him drown was kneeling there on the cliff, praying, not for his life to be spared, but for him to die. Satterthwaite recoiled, appalled. Good heavens, you cannot mean— Yes, she said with grim certainty. That is the truth. The servants thought I prayed for his salvation, but I prayed for the sea to take him. The room seemed suddenly colder, as if the warmth of sunlight had been snuffed out by her confession. Trivia question for viewers. Do you think the woman's confession was an act of cruelty, or the release of a terrible secret she had carried too long? Scene 6. Fate brings them together. Her voice trembled softer now, almost as if she were whispering her sins to the air itself. I wasn't praying that he might be saved, she confessed, her eyes distant. I was begging God to help me not wish him dead. Again and again I repeated it, but the truth inside me was darker. I wanted it, I hoped for it, and in the end, my hope was granted. The words lingered like smoke in the room. For a moment, silence pressed down heavily between them. Then she continued almost to herself. That is the sort of thing one never forgets. To realize I was relieved, no, glad, that he was gone. The day he drowned, I felt free. No more torment, no more cruelty. I should not have been so young to know such misery. Perhaps if I had been older, I could have endured it better. But at 19, her voice broke for an instant before hardening again. Mr. Satterthwaite, his heart aching, could only murmur, My child. She nodded bitterly. No one ever knew what he was truly like. I thought him so charming when I first met him, so strong, so impressive. I was proud when he chose me. But the mask slipped almost at once. He grew angry at everything I did, as though my very existence provoked him. And then he began to take pleasure in frightening me. His greatest amusement was to invent new ways to terrify me. Her eyes darkened with shadows of memory. The worst of it was the child. I was carrying a baby. But because of the things he did, my baby was born dead. I nearly died too. And in that moment I wished I had. Satterthwaite felt an involuntary shudder. She continued, relentless, as if her story had to be told now or never. The end came when he took a dare. Some foolish young men from the hotel urged him into the sea where the currents were savage. The Spaniards begged him not to, but he was too vain, too reckless. He wanted to show off his strength, and I stood above on the cliff, and I watched. I saw him fight the waves, I saw him weaken, I saw him sink beneath the surf. And I was glad, because my nightmare was over. For a moment, she seemed to shed her age. The bitterness melted, and the woman before him became a fragile girl of 19, clutching desperately at freedom. When he was gone, the villa became mine. My prison turned into my refuge. I was an orphan, with no family to question what became of me. So I stayed, and for a while it was paradise. To wake each morning without fear, to know no pain awaited me. that was heaven." Her voice softened with memory, but then shifted. "Yet freedom alone is not enough. After a while, loneliness crept in. I began to long for the child I had lost. I wanted someone, something, to hold, to love, to care for. It sounds childish, but that longing grew inside me." Satterthwaite's eyes softened. "I understand," he said gravely. She gave a faint smile tinged with sadness. "It was then he appeared, an Englishman at the hotel. One evening he wandered into the garden, and I, dressed in Spanish clothes, pretended to be a peasant girl. It amused me. His Spanish was dreadful, his English little better, so I acted as though the villa belonged to another English lady who was away. I said she had taught me a few words. I even pretended to speak broken English. Oh, how we laughed at it. For once, life felt like a game again." Her eyes lit up with the memory. "He believed me completely. He thought me a girl of the village. Soon he began to court me, and I played along. We pretended the villa was ours, that we were newlyweds moving into our home. I suggested we try the shutters, the very shutters you pushed aside tonight. We slipped inside. The rooms were dusty and unused, but to us, they became part of the illusion. We played at being husband and wife, and for those brief days, it was like living inside a fairy tale." She faltered for a moment, then looked at Satterthwaite with a childlike plea in her eyes. "You understand, don't you? It wasn't real. That was why it was so safe. Nothing could harm me in a dream." Her gaze softened. He was not extraordinary, just an ordinary young man looking for adventure. But he was kind, and that was enough. The next day, he returned, waiting in the garden, worried that I had not kept my promise to meet him. He never knew I was there, watching from the shuttered window. It touched me that he cared. Then he left. I never saw him again. Her hand trembled slightly as she finished her confession. 9 months later, my child was born. For the first time, I felt joy. To hold that baby, to know I could raise him in peace, without fear or cruelty, that was happiness beyond measure. Trivia question for viewers. If you were in her place, trapped in a cruel marriage, do you think fate delivered her freedom, or did she create it herself? Scene 7. Fate brings them together. Mr. Satterthwaite watched the woman intently, noticing the flicker of surprise in her eyes, as though the thoughts he had shared had never occurred to her before. His words carried more than mere philosophy. They bore the weight of conviction. Perhaps, he suggested, no life was wholly its own. Maybe all men and women were part of a vast drama, a play written and directed by unseen hands, where even the smallest gestures might alter the entire story. A simple act, one that seemed trivial, could, in the right moment, serve as the crucial signal for another. The woman listened quietly, her expression shifting from bewilderment to contemplation. Then, almost like a child surrendering to trust, she asked softly, "What do you want me to do?" It was, for Mr. Satterthwaite, a moment of quiet triumph. His influence, so subtle and indirect, had always been his gift. He told her clearly, she must do nothing rash, at least for the next 24 hours. She hesitated, then solemnly agreed. Before leaving, he asked one more favor, that she leave the shutter of the room unfastened and keep watch there through the night. Though puzzled by the strange request, she agreed without protest. With that, their conversation ended. As he stepped out, the silent Spanish servant girl held the door open, her dark eyes watching him with quiet curiosity. Twilight had fallen by the time he returned to the hotel. On the terrace sat Anthony Cade, alone, his features shadowed but unmistakable in their weariness. Satterthwaite approached casually, concealing his inner urgency beneath an air of friendly nonchalance. He spoke lightly about the warmth of the evening and losing track of time on the cliffs, but inwardly, he knew this moment balanced on a knife's edge. Cade looked up, and for an instant, a shaft of light revealed his expression. It was raw, broken, the unguarded pain of a man carrying a sorrow so heavy it defied words. His grief was not the kind that sought explanation, but something primal, like the suffering of a wounded animal. Abruptly, Cade spoke. His voice was ragged, stripped of hope. He admitted his plan. After dinner, he would take another walk to the cliffs. This time, he insisted, it would succeed. His third attempt would not fail. He begged Satterthwaite not to interfere. Satterthwaite, straightening, denied that interference was ever his way, though deep down he knew it was the very essence of his nature. Cade gave a mirthless laugh, claiming he already knew what the older man was thinking. But Satterthwaite challenged him quietly. No one, not truly, can know the mind of another. The words startled Cade, forcing him to concede that perhaps there was truth in it. Satterthwaite quickly steered the conversation away from despair. With deliberate calm, he spoke of an old villa he had wandered near that day, of its haunting beauty and its secrets. He admitted, almost playfully, that he had trespassed, trying one of the shutters. Cade's head snapped up at once. "And?" he demanded urgently. "It opened," Satterthwaite said. "The third shutter from the end." Something flared in Cade's eyes. Recognition, hope, memory. He cut himself off, but Satterthwaite had seen enough. His task was complete. Cade would not ignore that revelation. The man's future now rested on what he chose to do. The next morning, Satterthwaite returned to the gardens of La Paz. Manuel greeted him at the gate, offering a rosebud with a smile that carried meaning. Accepting it, Satterthwaite entered the villa's peaceful grounds, the whitewashed walls glowing in the sunlight, the shutters touched with age, orange blossoms spilling like fire across the walls. Everything was serene, too serene, as though the previous night had been nothing more than a dream. And then she appeared. The woman, radiant and transformed, came to him with an energy that seemed almost supernatural. Her eyes sparkled, her cheeks were flushed, and she moved with an exuberance he had not seen before. Without hesitation, she clasped his shoulders and kissed him again and again in gratitude and uncontainable joy. He would never forget that moment, the sun warm on his face, the scent of roses in the air, the sound of birds in the branches, and above all, her overwhelming happiness. "How did you know?" she cried breathlessly. "How could you possibly know? You were right. Anthony and I are going to the consul today to be married. When John returns, we'll explain everything. He will understand. It was all a mistake, and now it's over. Can you believe it? Oh, how happy I am." Her words tumbled out in wonder, her joy boundless. What amazed her most was Anthony's love for his son, that he had always longed to know the boy. To her, it was like a fairy tale, every piece falling into place as if written by destiny itself. Satterthwaite listened gently, warning her only that if she could give Anthony happiness in the time left to him, she would have accomplished something beautiful. But she shook her head with fierce determination, refusing the notion of his impending death. Doctors could be wrong, she said. She had seen it before, and she would not, could not, allow Anthony to leave her now. Her defiance, her unshakable faith in life, made Satterthwaite pause. Looking at her radiant strength, he realized she might very well be right. Later, walking alone down the cypress path, he found Harley Quinn waiting for him. Dark, enigmatic, both smiling and sorrowful, Quinn greeted him as if expected. They sat together in silence until Quinn remarked, half amused, that Satterthwaite had once again played the hand of Providence. But Satterthwaite countered, saying Quinn had known all along. Quinn denied omniscience, yet admitted he had been present with a purpose. When pressed, he explained that he had acted as an advocate on behalf of one already gone, a man who had drowned at those very cliffs 22 years earlier. Satterthwaite frowned, puzzled, but Quinn elaborated. Perhaps the man had loved his wife after all, in his own destructive way. Love, when twisted, could become cruelty. And sometimes, even from beyond death, remorse demanded redress. Death, Satterthwaite objected, cuts off such chances. Quinn only smiled. Does it? Death is not an end, but a change. If the desire is strong enough, regret, love, and longing may reach across it. There are always messengers. His words faded, and when Satterthwaite turned back for one last glance, Quinn was already walking toward the cliff's edge, his figure dissolving into the horizon. Trivia question for viewers. Do you believe love and regret can reach beyond death, shaping the lives of the living? Yes or no? Scene 8. Mr. Quinn's final message. Mr. Satterthwaite regarded the young woman with quiet intensity. There was wonder in her eyes, as if his words had opened a door she had never before imagined. He spoke with a deliberate calm, his voice carrying the weight of something greater than himself. Life, he suggested, might not entirely belong to us. Perhaps each person was part of a vast drama arranged by a divine playwright, where even the smallest role mattered and the briefest gesture could ripple into consequences beyond measure. The young woman, bewildered at first, eventually sat down. After a long silence, she asked simply, almost humbly, what he wanted of her. For Satterthwaite, it was a quiet triumph. He had always believed in his ability to shape events with subtle nudges, and this was proof enough. He instructed her to do nothing reckless for the next 24 hours. She listened earnestly, then gave him her word. But before leaving, he added one more request. The shutter of the villa, the one he had tested, must remain unfastened, and she must keep vigil there through the night. Though puzzled, she agreed, trusting him with the ease of one who sensed the moment was larger than herself. As he departed, a silent Spanish maid held the door for him, her dark eyes following him with unspoken curiosity. Dusk had already descended by the time Satterthwaite returned to the hotel. On the terrace, a solitary figure sat brooding in the fading light, Anthony Cade. With practiced ease, Satterthwaite greeted him casually, as though their meeting was nothing unusual. Yet beneath the surface, he knew one wrong word could undo everything. Anthony's face, briefly illuminated by the lantern glow, revealed exhaustion and a pain too deep for words. It was raw, animal-like grief, the kind that did not reason or explain, only endured. Suddenly, he spoke in a strained, almost desperate voice. He confessed that after dinner he planned to walk alone, and this time his third attempt would not fail. He begged Satterthwaite not to interfere, admitting that though his intentions were kind, they would be useless. Satterthwaite straightened, denying interference, though he knew it was a lie. His entire existence seemed defined by it. Anthony scoffed bitterly, claiming he already knew what the older man was thinking. But Satterthwaite gently contradicted him, reminding him that no one could ever truly know another's thoughts. For the first time, Anthony faltered, conceding that perhaps there was some truth in that. Easing the tension, Satterthwaite shifted the conversation toward the old villa. He described its lonely beauty, confessing that he had tested one of the shutters. Anthony snapped to attention, demanding the result. When Satterthwaite revealed that the third shutter from the end had been unlatched, a spark lit in Anthony's weary eyes before he abruptly silenced himself. Satterthwaite knew then his part in the play was done. Whatever followed lay beyond his control. That night he ate with quiet nerves, reflecting on every word he had spoken. He hoped his guidance had been clear enough, for memory and fate were forces he could only direct so far. Tomorrow would tell the rest. The following morning, around 10, he returned to the gardens of La Paz. Manuel, the gardener, greeted him with a smile and offered a single rosebud, as though he too sensed something had shifted. Accepting it with care, Satterthwaite approached the villa, its whitewashed walls, its orange creepers tumbling across the shutters, and its serene stillness made him wonder if the entire episode had been nothing more than a dream. Then a window opened, and she appeared. The young woman moved toward him, radiant with joy, her cheeks flushed, her eyes shining as though touched by sunlight itself. Without hesitation, she placed her hands on his shoulders and kissed him with breathless gratitude. For Satterthwaite, the moment was etched in fragments: the warmth of the sun, the perfume of roses, the sound of birds in the air, and her uncontainable happiness. She called him her dearest, marveling at how he had known, insisting he possessed a strange wisdom. With a trembling voice, she explained that she and Anthony would visit the consul that very day to be married. She believed that when John returned, he would accept the past as a misunderstanding and welcome them without objection. Again and again she declared how impossibly happy she was. Her joy spilled over as she revealed what had astonished her most. Anthony had cared all along, cared deeply about his son. For her, it was the proof that love had triumphed over time and silence. To Satterthwaite, she appeared as she truly was, a dreamer, a child at heart, someone who clung to the certainty that stories must always end with happily ever after. He told her softly that if she could bring Anthony happiness in his remaining days, then she would have achieved something beautiful. But she rejected the notion of death with fierce defiance. Many, she argued, had outlived medical predictions. Why should Anthony not? She laughed at the suggestion, insisting that fate would not be so cruel now that they had finally found one another. Satterthwaite studied her, struck by her vitality, her unshakable faith, and thought perhaps she might even be right. Later, he walked alone down the cypress path toward the sea, where, as he expected, Mr. Quinn awaited him. Dark, enigmatic, smiling yet sorrowful, Quinn greeted him quietly. They sat together, the silence heavy between them, until Quinn remarked that Satterthwaite had once more taken on the role of Providence. Satterthwaite bristled slightly, reminding him that Quinn, too, had known all along what was happening. But Quinn, as always, sidestepped, claiming no omniscience. When pressed, however, he admitted he had been fulfilling a commission as an advocate for the dead. This puzzled Satterthwaite until Quinn gestured toward the restless sea. He spoke of a man who had drowned there 22 years ago, a man whose love had been destructive and possessive, capable of cruelty disguised as devotion. Sometimes, Quinn said, love burns too fiercely and becomes torment. Yet, even in death, remorse might linger, an aching need to make amends. When Satterthwaite protested that death ends such chances, Quinn merely scoffed. Death, he reminded him, is but a transition. Regret and love do not vanish with the body. If the yearning is strong enough, a messenger will always be found. Shaken, Satterthwaite rose. He suggested they walk back together, but Quinn declined. Instead, he said he would return by the way he had come. When Satterthwaite turned back for one last glance, he saw Quinn walking toward the cliff's edge, his figure merging with the horizon, mysterious as ever. Trivia question for viewers. In Agatha Christie's stories, Mr. Harley Quinn often appears at moments of deep emotional conflict. Do you think he is meant to be a real man, or is he more of a symbolic figure of fate itself? Scene by scene. Analysis of Agatha Christie's The Man from the Sea. Scene 1. The lonely cliffside encounter. On a moonlit evening by the sea cliffs, Frank encounters a mysterious stranger whose air of despair is unmistakable. The man speaks in fragments, hinting at deep sorrow and the weight of hidden troubles. The setting itself, wild waves crashing below, echoes the danger of his unspoken thoughts. This first meeting sets a tone of unease, suggesting that chance encounters may reveal more than expected. Theme: even strangers can carry burdens that mirror our own struggles. Viewer. Question: have you ever spoken with a stranger who revealed something unexpectedly personal? Scene 2. A confession in the dark. The stranger gradually confides that his life feels unlivable, though he spares details. Frank senses both the depth of the man's pain and the risk that the sea below may become his escape. Their conversation hovers between companionship and warning, as if fate itself staged this midnight meeting. The cliff, half lit by the moon, becomes both a stage for despair and a test of conscience. Theme: silence can be more revealing than confession. Viewer. Question: do you think opening up to strangers is safer or more dangerous? Scene 3. The shadow of duty. Frank discerns that the man's despair springs not from poverty, but from entanglements of duty, obligation, and betrayal. The weight of social appearances and hidden choices presses on him. Though unnamed, the figure represents how even those who appear respectable may feel trapped beyond rescue. Frank listens, but also judges, sensing moral weakness disguised as despair. Theme: appearances can hide the deepest prisons. Viewer question: do you believe people are more trapped by outside expectations or by their own decisions? Scene 4. The echo of a woman's voice. Hints emerge of a woman at the heart of the mystery. The stranger alludes to love entangled with betrayal, perhaps a relationship that led him into a labyrinth of deceit. The waves crash below as he almost whispers her significance, but refuses to name her. Frank feels the invisible presence of this unseen woman, someone both cherished and cursed. Theme: love can be both salvation and destruction, depending on the choices made. Viewer. Question: do you think love is more often a guiding light or a dangerous trap in mysteries? Scene 5. The temptation of the sea. The man stands closer to the cliff's edge, suggesting that the sea offers him release. Frank's unease grows, recognizing how quickly despair could turn into tragedy. The contrast between calm conversation and the deadly drop just feet away gives the scene its chilling suspense. The night itself feels complicit, holding its breath as if waiting for a decision. Theme: despair creates illusions of escape where only finality lies. Viewer. Question: do you think the sea here represents freedom or danger? Scene 6. Frank's intervention. Sensing that the man is on the brink, Frank makes a deliberate effort to speak with firmness, urging him to reconsider. His words are not dramatic but steady, offering the reminder that choices carry weight beyond one night. The dialogue becomes a battle between despair and responsibility, with the tide below roaring like an impatient judge. Theme: sometimes the quiet voice of reason can save a life. Viewer question: do you think logic or empathy is more powerful in pulling someone back from despair? Scene 7. A silent goodbye. The stranger, torn between confession and silence, abruptly departs into the night. No resolution comes, only the lingering sense that Frank has witnessed a man at the edge of fate. The sea remains unchanged, its waves endlessly crashing, as though indifferent to human suffering. The story closes not with revelation, but with haunting ambiguity. Theme: some mysteries end not with answers, but with echoes that stay with us. Viewer. Question: do you prefer mysteries that tie up every detail, or ones that leave room for haunting questions? Let's discuss key characters. At the heart of the story is Frank, the solitary observer who stumbles upon a stranger at the cliffs. His role is not only to listen, but also to weigh the man's despair against reason, representing the voice of conscience and moral judgment. The unnamed stranger embodies conflict and despair, caught between duty, betrayal, and love. His words carry the emotional weight of the story, and his actions by the sea edge create its tension. Shadowing their dialogue is the invisible presence of a woman, never fully introduced but implied through the stranger's hints of entanglement, love, and ruin. Her existence drives the despair without ever stepping onto the page. Finally, the sea itself functions almost as a character, vast, indifferent, and tempting, symbolizing both escape and destruction, reflecting the central conflict between life and surrender. My final thought: in the end, the man from the sea lingers not for what it reveals, but for what it withholds. The story reminds us that despair is often invisible until it reaches a breaking point, and that even the briefest encounter can place us face to face with someone's hidden tragedy. Christie leaves us with a haunting ambiguity. Did the stranger find release, or did he return to his chains of duty? The sea, eternal and indifferent, becomes the silent witness to human weakness and resilience alike. It is a tale that forces us to consider how easily life can turn on unspoken choices. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Christie's shadows. Do you think the stranger chose the sea that night, or did he walk away to continue his burdened life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoy exploring mysteries that challenge both heart and mind, make sure to subscribe now. Each week, we uncover another story where silence speaks louder than words.